This study begins our brief survey of the history of Western music. Musical history is normally divided into 7 periods. They are the Ancient Era, or the music of antiquity, from about 450 BC to 800 AD. The Medieval period, or the Middle Ages, sometimes called the Dark Ages, from 500 to 1400 AD. The Renaissance period, from 1400 to 1600 AD. The Baroque period, from 1600 to 1750 AD. The Classical period, 1750 to 1820 AD. The Romantic period, from 1820 to 1900. And the Modern Era, from 1900 to the present. In our study, we will subdivide some of these periods into important trends and composers of those eras. In each of the periods, we will focus on 5 major points. Number 1, the composers of that era. Number 2, the instruments used. Number 3, technological influences. Number 4, examples of music forms and textures. And number 5, social, philosophical, and moral influences on the times. CITES will be our acronym for these 5 areas. First off, let's revisit the Temple of Solomon in about 900 BC. We know that King David and King Solomon wrote a significant amount of the music of the temple. And while David and Solomon were the most prominent, there were other composers who also contributed to the songs sung in the temple. Some of the songs were written by figures like Moses, others by Hezekiah and Asaph. Some of the instruments used in the temple were the kinnor, which is a type of harp, the asor, a 10-stringed harp, a larger harp, the nabel, which is a lute or lyre, a predecessor of the guitar, the shofar, or a ram's horn, the chetzorah, which is a silver trumpet blown by the priests, the zilzulim, those are cymbals, tov, which is a drum, which is also a type of tambourine, the menachaneim, which is a shaker, the ugan, which is a flute, and the khalil, a form of pipe. In this link, they will give you a description of these ancient instruments. As far as technology, there were really no technological musical advances in this period. The main advances were in architecture, the building of the temple, and the building of the great amphitheaters of the Greeks. The music of the ancient era was very different from the music we hear today. Ancient music was of monophonic texture. The word monophonic is a combination of the Greek word mono, meaning one, and phone, which means voice or sound. In other words, singing in harmony was apparently not a part of their musical vocabulary. They sang only in unison. That's hard for us to grasp today. But here is an example of a monophonic call and response. Psalm 136 is a perfect example of call and response music. In this psalm, the priest would call out from the steps of the temple, and the people would respond in a unison voice. Imagine at the Feast of Passover, with about 2 million people out there for the festival. What an awesome sound that was. The priest would stand on the steps and sing, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good," and the congregation would echo, His love endures forever. The priest would say, "Give thanks to the God of gods." The congregation would echo, "His love endures forever." And so on throughout the whole psalm. This link is to a modern representation of the temple choir with instruments. They are using modern day instruments, but this is filmed on the steps of the gates outside the temple. Now we will fast forward to the time of Pythagoras, around 600 BC. Pythagoras saw music as a reflection of the mathematical structures of the universe. He proposed that celestial bodies produce a kind of cosmic music through their movements. He linked musical intervals to simple numerical ratios, forming the foundation of his harmony of the spheres theory. Pythagoras said that we think music sounds good or pleasing because that music reflects the fundamental mathematical ratios that govern the entire universe. Music was extremely important in ancient Greek culture. It served as an integral part of religious ceremonies, social events, education, even warfare. It was believed to have a powerful ethical and emotional effect on the soul, and was deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. From public festivals to private banquets, and music education was a fundamental part of the training for the Greek elite, helping to develop discipline and a sense of order. The Greeks built beautiful amphitheaters which had wonderful acoustics, where Greek poetry and drama was performed as sung works. It was drama with musical accompaniment. Unfortunately, up to this point in time, we have no historical evidence of musical notation. It was all passed down by ear and often improvised, until the Greeks developed a very effective system of notation. This system was very beneficial for several reasons. Number one, it allowed for musical compositions of more complex nature by selecting those improvised musical ideas in advance and combining and writing them down and manipulating them in a new arrangement. Secondly, it guided performers with precise instructions. And it created a universal language for musicians to collaborate and communicate ideas and build upon musical styles from other times and cultures. Here is an example of that musical notation. The music of that time was monophonic. Again, that means one voice or one sound. And this is an example of music that demonstrates the original sounds of ancient Greek voices and instruments. This monophonic style was also characterized the music of the early church. The first century chanting style of music was primarily called plain chant. Plainchant. This monophonic, unaccompanied, free-flowing, unmeasured vocal music was part of the Jewish tradition of chanting scripture and psalms. Early Christians brought this into their worship. This monophonic vocal music was a single melodic line that followed the natural cadence of the human voice, often called plain song. Musical instruments were largely absent from these services, as many early Christians viewed them as pagan or associated them with the Old Covenant. Chanting made the text of Scripture audible to large gatherings. It added beauty and emotion and dignity to worship, and it helped in memorization. And this brings us to the end of the ancient era and the beginning of the Gregorian chant period and the medieval time. Gregorian chant is named after Pope Gregory because he is credited with organizing, standardizing, and cataloging church music during his papacy, 590 to 604 AD. While historical evidence suggests he did not compose all the chants, his significant role was in unifying the repertoire of the church, and it laid the foundation for the tradition that would eventually bear his name. Here are two characteristics of Gregorian chant. Number one, they are performed without musical instruments. Number two, they are monophonic in texture. During this time of liturgical reform, Pope Gregory's ordered the simplification and cataloging of church music. This was a crucial step in creating a cohesive musical tradition for the entire Western Church. Gregorian chant notation is important because it was the first step in developing Western musical notation, allowing music to be written down for the first time, which eventually led to the creation of complex musical structures like polyphony. It provided a way to communicate musical ideas more precisely and making it easier to learn and perform chants consistently and laying the groundwork for centuries of musical evolution. Here is an example of one of the more advanced Gregorian chant notations called Adorate Deum. The text is translated into, "Bow down before God, all you angels of his. Zion has heard and is glad, and the daughters of Judah have rejoiced. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. Let all the islands be glad." Chant notation continued to evolve over several centuries, each stage representing a significant improvement in accuracy and consistency. The earliest notes, called neumes, were symbols written above the text without staff lines. They gave only the melodic contour, whether the pitch went up or down, relative to the previous note. But they provided no specific information about the intervals between the pitches. They served primarily as memory prompts for the singers who had already learned the melody orally. Notation helped to preserve musical tradition, enabling the transmission of sacred music and allowing future generations to study and perform it. The Gregorian chants were composed using a system of modes that had already been invented by the Greeks almost 1,000 years earlier. These modes were familiar to people and helped to aid in memorization and standardize worship through music. The initial system of modes, influenced by Greek theory, consisted of 4 modes used for Gregorian chant, including the Dorian and Phrygian mode. These were built from notes using the diatonic scale. and each one having a distinct final note. The number of official modes was soon doubled to 8 to account for different vocal ranges. We will discuss this more in our next lesson. Now, let's look at a review of our ancient music era. C for composers. Remember that David, Solomon, Moses, and Asaph were prominent Hebrew composers. The Greek playwrights wrote poetry and plays that were put to music. And the first century hymn writers and psalms were also put to chant. The instruments used were the kinnor, the nebel, the shofar, the chatzorah, the zelzulim, the tov, the meniachayim, the khalil, the olos, the kithra, which is the Greek harp. And the technology of the area were the beginnings of musical notation and great buildings like the temple and the amphitheaters. The examples of music forms and textures were monophonic forms, and the style was plain chant, chanting, and call and response. The greatest social influence and moral influence was the church and the arts. Tomorrow we will continue the progression of Gregorian chant, as well as a deeper dive into the modal system as we study the medieval period.